Now, Shaun, from time to time here on Double Tap, we do like to delve into the world of Android. Yes, Android, over there, the Google people. And you know what, Shaun, we have a Google person with us today on our show.
I know. I think it's the fact that you refer to them as Google people that maybe keeps them away. Yes, but
actually, no, hang on. As far as we'll get confirmation of this in a second, but I believe they call themselves Googlers.
Do they?
That's what
we'll find out.
Lisie Lillianfeld, I think I got that right, is with us from Google. I do apologize, Lisie. Did I get that right?
Lillianfeld. Very
close enough. Okay, there we go. So not quite. Thank you, Lisie. Great to have you with us here on Double Tap. It's a bit chaotic over here. I apologize for everything in advance.
No worries. Good to be here.
Now, you are a product manager at Android, or for Android at Google. Are you called Googlers? Is that what you call yourselves?
Yes.
See? Told you,
You
Shaun.
are quite right. Okay, I take it all back. That's far better than those Google people, I must say. Googlers, I'll remember that. Thanks.
Listen, thank you so much for coming on. I've got to say, major props to you and your team for an amazing release of TalkBack 15 this year. In particular, I think the headline topic we have to talk about is image descriptions now being available through Gemini. It's a fantastic feature. It's turned a lot of heads in our community. Those of us who are iPhone users have been saying for a long time, it'd be cool to have a simple way to do this on the iPhone. Google comes along, bang, there you go. You can do it. How did it come about? How did you marry Gemini and TalkBack? Was it a nice service?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think across the tech industry, obviously, there's a lot of enthusiasm about generative AI and looking for the right applications. So, of course, in accessibility, we're thinking, how can we apply this new technology to unlock functionality that wasn't possible before? And we really saw this as kind of the beginning, the first thing that we could do that would really take advantage of the new technology to provide more functionality for our users.
And how does this actually work? I haven't tried this feature out yet. How does it work? Is it done, processed locally? Is it sent off to the cloud?
Very good question. A little bit of both.
Oh.
So the way that it works, so the on-device Gemini Nano is only available on the newest Pixel devices. It's a hardware limitation. So for the devices where it's supported, we do have the option to run the on-device model. But we wanted to also make this available more broadly to users on other devices. And so for that, we have the server-side model. So yes and yes.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's something we have talked about after the Pixel event. That was, the AI, as Stephen alluded to before, the AI everywhere. And the fact that, so many devices have access to this AI in TalkBack, it is, I think a lot of people really appreciate that. It's not just a case, only this model, only this handset, only at this time, only if you're standing on your head. It's a case of, a lot of people are going to get their hands on this and be able to try it out.
Yes. And, just in case anybody's wondering, the server-side model processes the images and then deletes them immediately. So they're not getting stored or anything. They just need to be sent to the model so the description can be generated. That's all.
That's very nice.
And there's going to be a little bit of difference in latency and lag, if you like, between, on-device processing and sending off to the cloud. But are we talking, seconds, if anything?
So there's a difference, but actually the server-side one is faster.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you know, it's funny. It's funny you say that, right? Because I was kind of wondering, because obviously in a sense you've got a lot more power on the server side, so it's really just the internet connection that's between you, right? So if that's solid, then arguably we get faster than you can get on device. Which I guess this is the new challenge for AI more generally, isn't it? That ultimately the power of our smartphones is going to increase and increase and increase, and eventually we'll get to that level. But that's going to take time. Whereas obviously a server farm's been built over time, and it has that power. In terms of this, is this just a one idea you've got for Gemini and TalkBack and I guess accessibility more generally, or are you seeing potential ways that this could expand further into TalkBack in particular?
We have many, many ideas. I'm not at liberty to comment on any particulars.
Oh,
but
come on.
I know. But, everybody's very excited about what these models can do currently and what they can do in the future. And obviously, we always look to the newest technology to see what new capabilities we can provide.
Well, it's interesting. There does seem to be a bit of a AI gold rush at the minute. Everyone's rushing towards AI. It's a bit like when everything was smart, right? Everything was a smart toothbrush, a smart toilet, a smart whatever it may be back in the day. Now everything is AI powered. But do you see this, where do you see this in relationship to a screen reader such as TalkBack? Is there any crossover, as in, do you think the AI becomes the main driving technology behind the screen reader at any point, or is it always going to be an additional tool, another function, if you like, that screen readers can jump out to?
That's a great question. And I think this really gets to the core of what we're trying to understand with generative AI is what it does well, what it can do reliably, what users trust it to do. We want to use it for those things and not beyond that. So for now, right, we understand that screen readers need to be very reliable and predictable. And so that's why right now it's doing what it's doing, right? It's not being powered by generative AI. As the model capability improves, we'll see what the right application is. But we always are kind of balancing the innovation with also the dependability and the trust.
Can I ask a little bit more about the image descriptions themselves? Because, I guess everyone has a view on what an image description is. How do you know how much to give as an image description? How do you prompt it essentially to give it an image description which gives enough information that gives you the sense of what you're actually looking at?
That's such a good question because we do understand that the amount of detail somebody wants might be personal. It might depend on the context. It's not so straightforward. But one thing that we noticed early on is that Gemini seems to be very good at starting with the kind of high-level impression and then going into the details. And that works beautifully for TalkBack because it lets the user hear as much as they want to hear, and then they can just navigate to the next element and move on.
And because the image is being processed on device or on Google's servers, can you allow for, let's say, for example, it's an image of a grandfather with his granddaughter on his knee. As we've actually talked about before on the show, we've actually had someone get in touch with exactly that example. And when they ran it through other AIs, it would come back with, an elderly gentleman sitting with a young child on his knee, but it doesn't say who he is. It doesn't identify him, doesn't identify his granddaughter. Is that something you're able to do with Gemini and TalkBack together at this point?
That's such a great question. Gemini is fairly good at celebrities.
Okay.
So if the older person was like publicly a recognizable person, it might actually be able to catch that. Now, if you're talking about somebody who's not famous, who's just somebody in your family, that's a really interesting question because, of course, I see the user value. I also think about, though, how would the user communicate that to Google, and would the user be comfortable sending images? Would the grandfather be comfortable sending images, right? A lot of times there are these trade-offs between functionality and privacy, and we want to provide the functionality and we want to respect the privacy. So that's what I think of in reaction to your suggestion, is just like that it would have to be done carefully.
Because it is a deeper level of what we want sometimes as blind people, especially because we need that information. We want that information. Well, I think if you are someone who's been taking pictures of your family and you want to be able to have them described back to you, then you absolutely want that.
Though. I mean, if it says, a fat balding man, I know it's me, right? I mean,
well, it could be me.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Good point. Yeah, but I don't wear sunglasses.
Now you don't know who's who. Okay, the glasses give it away, right? Okay, fine.
But that's an interesting point, though, right? Is there a difference between describing an image for, a mainstream audience than a blind person? I suppose the answer is, well, a sighted person isn't going to be using TalkBack. But, I mean, just generally using Gemini AI, is there a difference in the description that you get back, I mean?
That's an ethical question, isn't it?
Kind of. I don't know.
It's a good question, right? Because image descriptions are used for other purposes, right? Maybe I just want to compare two images, and maybe it's easier to compare the descriptions than it is to compare the images, right? In any sort of batch processing, right? There's so many different ways that image descriptions could be used, and you're right that different kinds of descriptions would be useful in different contexts.
But the images that are used in Google through Google Gemini and TalkBack together are not stored. They're not used for training the algorithm or training the AI or any of that stuff, right?
Right.
Okay,
why not? You weren't expecting a backlash about that, were you?
I wasn't. No. I wasn't.
No. Just from a technical, I'm interested. I mean, is it a stage that, hey, we've had enough images now, we don't need to train it, or are you training it on other sources and don't? Because I think that is the main concern when it comes to AI, right? Everyone just, first thing they say is, well, what happens to the things that I'm sharing, the things that I'm asking, or the things that I'm sending to it? So privacy is a big deal. But I mean, personally, I don't have an issue with any of my stuff being used to train AI. I want AI to be better. So is this just purely because this is, better looking not to use images to train, or is it you just don't need the data?
That's a really good question. I think that the scale that we would be getting from TalkBack is probably not going to make or break the next generation of AI models, is one, right, why? Also, we do respect the user's privacy, and especially because we know in this situation, the user probably doesn't know what's in the image until they're already sending it. That's a situation where we want to be extra respectful of privacy, right? A different application where the user already knows what's in the image, maybe that's a situation where we would get some value from collecting those images, but this is not one of those situations, and we really respect privacy.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah, you don't know what's in the image until it's away. That's a good point. It seems to me that there's a great hunger for this kind of feature now in the blind community, and it's brought photos to life for a lot of blind people, which is kind of amazing, isn't it? That a year ago I would not have really cared about an image on a website. If it didn't have alt text on it, I wouldn't have bothered about it. If it had alt text, great, but I wasn't looking for it. Now there's a huge demand for alt text. There's a huge demand for the ability to describe images. And now, of course, building that into TalkBack is huge. Are you getting that sense as well from the community that use Google devices, that use TalkBack?
The phrase that we keep hearing is that it's a game changer. And that just... I'm thrilled. Every time I hear a comment like that, really, it makes me feel like we're putting our effort where it matters.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we can't get enough of it. I'm interested, and Stephen's probably going to shout at me afterwards for asking this question. And honestly, if it goes too technical, feel free to say, no, you won't understand, Shaun, because I probably won't. But I'm really interested in when else am I going to be able to ask this question of the Nano, right? The AI, what do you call it, model, I suppose, that runs on the device versus the one that runs on the server farms. I'm assuming, I can't quite understand, does that contain every object in the world, like a cuckoo clock or a plate or a tricycle or whatever? And I mean, how does it recognize and describe an image knowing what objects are?
You could probably get a more specific explanation from somebody else, but to the best of my knowledge, the process involves training the model server side, and then what they call distilling it down to kind of condense all of that information into a smaller model.
Okay.
So it should understand all of the same things, but in that kind of condensing process, it's going to lose a little bit of precision.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must admit, I don't think any of us really understand how any of this stuff really works. We just kind of just love that it does.
But
right?
we're seeing it so many more times now. When companies are unveiling their AI, we're seeing these different versions. Maybe not so much, end user, but in the developer conferences, we're seeing, 11, is it gigabyte or terabyte models, that run on the servers, and 3 terabyte or gigabyte ones that run on devices. And we had a listener who emailed in and said, how can you get all those objects that could be in a picture into a database and fit that onto your phone? And we say, it just
because
does.
It's not the actual photos. It's kind of this vectorized phase space abstracted understanding of these things.
Oh, it's magic. Thank you very much. That's all I
I'm
needed
going
to
to
hear.
run that through Gemini after this and figure out what that means. Write this as a 3-year-old would understand it. That's what I'm writing after this, because that is incredible. And it is amazing. It fascinates me. It blows me away. I do not understand it all. I don't pretend to, but I love it. And I love the fact that it does work. Here's a question for you. Can you, I believe at this point you can't, but would you consider following or being able to follow up on an image? So, you get an image description, you think, okay, it's mentioned that there's a cake on the table. Which kind of cake is that exactly? These are the kind of questions I would ask, Lisie. So, what kind of cake is it? And, you could sort of follow up and get that detail. Is that possible, or is that coming, or is that a thing?
So what I can tell you is that it is the kind of thing that Gemini can do. If you're in the Gemini app and you upload a photo and you ask for a description, you could ask Gemini for follow-ups. So technically, the capability exists. Also, I want to comment that I appreciate the feedback, and I'll even say that actually we have a tester program specifically for people with disabilities who want to test products and give early feedback. So if either you or any of your listeners are interested, google.com/accessibility has the link. I believe you kind of scroll down and it says like participate in a tester program. If folks are interested, that is precisely the kind of suggestions that we are interested and excited in hearing, because it does inform what things we choose to build.
Okay, here's a great follow-up question to that. At least I think it is. So if I can go to the Gemini app, obviously using TalkBack, and it's all accessible and that's all cool. I go to the Gemini app and I upload the image. Do I get a similar image description from it that I do from TalkBack?
That's a good question. Yes, it should be very similar.
Okay, so you kind of have a back door to that. I mean, it's not much of a back door. I mean, it's fairly open, right? It's still the front door, actually. Yeah, really. But it is possible right now, just not directly through TalkBack, but you could do it through the Gemini app. That's pretty cool.
And that's actually something that we talked about, is that like lots of things are possible with Gemini, but when we put the model in a particular context, that does change the user's expectation about how reliable it will be or how appropriate it will be for the situation. And so that's kind of why Gemini isn't immediately everywhere doing everything, because, right, it may or may not be exceptionally well suited to particular situations. And so that's why for something like TalkBack, we start with image descriptions and we can kind of validate, okay, this performs well in this situation, and we can kind of scale it out in an intentional way just to make sure that the quality is really there.
So do you, I don't know how to phrase this, do you package either the information you send, the image you send, or the response back to say, look, this is a visually impaired person, asking this question, instead of just sending the image straight off to the Gemini AI and it just putting back the, standard answers, kind of what I asked before, really. Is it phrased or framed in a way that, hey, this is the response is for a blind person?
That's a great question. I'm guessing that our actual prompt is probably secret sauce, but but you certainly can prompt Gemini either give me a description or with more context about who it's for. I will say that when I've tried mentioning for the word blind specifically, that does tend to trip its like medical advice flag, and then it's it always is saying talk with your doctor. I can't give medical advice. Yes. So that I've noticed that happens sometimes, but certainly we can play around with the prompting to try to get it to focus on certain things, and we obviously do that with our audience in mind.
And how much free rein are you giving it? I mean, this is the balancing act that AI companies have got to walk, of how much freedom you give the AI so it doesn't offend or be inappropriate at all. But that's the things that really sort of frustrate us. I've been using the Meta Ray-Bans, and every time I ask it if there's something in my way, I cannot give safety advice. It won't describe anyone in front of me. And I get that. You don't want it to misdescribe? That doesn't sound right. You don't want it to describe someone in an offensive way, for example. So it just doesn't bother. But that may be something that's really important to me. And, a sighted person can see the person anyway. So why is it that AI just seems to leave me out of it? It's that kind of frustration that I totally understand why the safety rails are there. But how do you judge how much to give it its own free rein?
So actually, I've got a great example for you on this one.
Okay.
Because this is where actually TalkBack is different than what the Gemini app will give you. On the Gemini app, if you upload a photo of a person, it says that it cannot describe images of people.
Okay.
And one of the requirements that I was like pretty firm about early on was in the context of TalkBack, we have to be able to describe people. And we know that it's sensitive, we understand, but for this user group, the ability to understand that there are people in the image and some details about them it overrides in this circumstance. And so in TalkBack, it will give you descriptions of people.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And of course, there's the other side of this, which is censorship to some degree. We've seen this argument a lot with deaf people saying, this is not good when you have captions that are, not giving you, a swear word, for example. It might be a cuss word that comes up and therefore it's blocked out or it's blanked out. And, that's something that's coming up as well. And it is that balance, but it's also treating people as adults. If a child is using the device, I would imagine there are various limitations put on the device so children don't see certain things in the same way, for adults not having those if they don't want those. Like I don't have kids, so I don't really mind if something shows up, if there's bad language in it. Fine, whatever.
Somebody think of the children. It's all context, though.
House.
It's all context sensitive, as Lisie said there. It's who's using it, how much information do they need. I think most people are grown up. Of course, there's parental controls for anything else, but I mean, all adults can understand that things aren't 100%. Some things may be said that aren't correct. But the information, that's what it's all about. It's vital.
Yeah. Actually, just to respond to the captions one, we think about this stuff all the time. And the captions one, I think the issue is that it's so mortifying when somebody says something appropriate and the captioning accidentally captions it as a swear word, that to avoid that situation, right? Makes sense now. So it's right. We don't want to censor people, but without that kind of feature, it could really embarrass people. And so that's, I think, what's being weighed there. So yes, but we think about this all the time, for sure.
It's been really wonderful talking to you, Lisie. Thank you so much for coming on today and putting up with us, because that's difficult for anybody.
Sorry.
And you'll be desperate to get back to your real work in a minute. But thank you so much for coming on today. Remind people again, because you mentioned there the website for people to become testers of Android and to get involved in all of this. Remind us how people can do that.
Yes, google.com/accessibility, and then scroll down to where it says participate in a tester program.
Lisie, thank you so much for coming on to Double Tap.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hi guys, Stephen here. If you want more content like this, then all you have to do is like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to catch new episodes of Double Tap, you can do right here on YouTube every weekday from noon Eastern, or on AMI Audio across Canada, and of course, in your favorite podcast app as well. Thanks for watching.